Hello, everybody. Welcome to 5 Hours of Tech SEO. We're really happy to have you with us today. My name is Paige Hobart. I'm an SEO team director at an agency called Roast, technically based in London, but as most of you are, we're all remote working. So, hi. I'm so excited to kick off our 5-hour Tech SEO marathon today. I'm going to be hosting the first 2.5 hours, which is 3 sessions. The first session with these lovely people with me now. I'm then going to hand over to the wonderful Nick Ranger, who's going to carry on with the last few sessions to take us all the way to 5 hours of Tech SEO. So the plan for today, 5 hours, 7 sessions. So we have the wonderful Martha van Berkel right now, which we'll do in a second, followed by Alida Solis, then Jess Schultz. Then Nick is going to tune in from Melbourne, and she's covering things like indexing issues, future of search, JavaScript SEO, log file analysis. So much fun stuff today. There's loads and loads of stuff. And with these amazing speakers, we also have really good, knowledgeable expert guests to take part in the Q&A session as well. So loads and loads of people to talk to today. So a little bit of housekeeping and admin before we kick off. All of these sessions are being recorded. So if you miss one or want to take a break for a tea, fear not. If you've subscribed, you'll get an email and you'll be able to replay all of these videos as long as you want. Secondly, please do ask questions in the YouTube live chat. We've got people there typing away. I'll be looking from screen to screen, constantly seeing what you guys are typing. So we'll make sure that we've got lots of questions for the Q&A. If your question isn't answered, please feel free to follow our guests on Twitter and chase them and make sure they do answer your question. That's totally fine by me. And then, of course, please do use our hashtag 5 hours of tech SEO on Twitter. Please, if you're going to take screenshots, make sure that you make us look wonderful. That would be preferable. But without further ado, please get comfy, get a drink, and settle in for the next 5 hours of Tech SEO. So I'll let the guys introduce themselves first, and then we'll lead on with Martha. Who'd like to go first? Jeff?
Sure. I can jump in. So my name is Jeffrey Burns. I am the customer success team lead at Schema App. I've been working in the weeds with structured data and schema markup for years now. And before that, I was a digital marketer. And before even being a digital marketer, I was selling SEO services. I'm really excited to dig into some of the details around schema markup.
Yeah, and that's, well, thanks, Jeff. Hi, Arnout Hellemans. Some of you might know me on Twitter. I'm the mayonnaise logo. I love to eat oysters, but apart from that, on my day-to-day stuff, you can wake me up in the middle of the night to talk about technical SEO stuff and loads of analytics and just too much. I'm based in Amsterdam, and I'm really looking forward to this.
All right, should we jump in? I'm super jazzed to be here. My name is Martha van Berkel, and I am the CEO here at Schema App. And just doing a tech check, everyone should see my beautiful orange.
Yep, you can see.
All right. Well, I like to introduce myself with my knowledge graph because I'm a schema markup nerd. So I actually grew up in enterprise. I worked for Cisco for 14 years. I have a technical background, so I studied mathematics and engineering at a Canadian university called Queen's. I had the opportunity to attend MIT for innovation and strategy, and I'm one of the founders of Schema App. I am Canadian, and I've seen a bunch of Canadians join in, so it looks like we got some good company. I'm also a proud mom of 2 very energetic children, and I used to own an Austin Healey Sprite, and my actual car, my 1965 Austin Healey Sprite, which is pictured here, was actually a star in a movie called Losing Chase. And in fact, it was a white car that was made red just for the movie. And that movie was actually directed by Kevin Bacon. And so Kevin Bacon used to drive my car. And why I mention this is because you've now inferred that you can win the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon game. If you don't know what that is, Google it. Because I'm 2 degrees from Kevin Bacon, which makes you now 3 degrees from Kevin Bacon. And I like to use that to introduce myself because what you just inferred or figured out is actually what Google does when you use Schema Markup to explain the relationships between things on your website, across your website, and across the web. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. We're actually going to really dig into Schema Markup. Schema Markup, as some of you may know, is a niche part of SEO. That's very technical, but it's really used to explain explicitly, like with absolute clarity, to search engines, and also to help you really stand out in search. And I sometimes say, how do you manage your brand to be understood by machines? Now, just to make sure we're being explicit and clear, you hear the term Schema Markup. It means the same thing as structured data. Now, you might be asking, like, Martha, why do you guys use Schema Markup over structured data? And the reason I prefer Schema Markup is it's actually more specific, because structured data can be structured in any way. It can be structured in a table and be structured data, whereas Schema Markup is very specific about using, this code to describe the things on your page. And so whenever everyone asks you, like, well, what is Schema Markup? Well, it is actually code. So you can see highlighted in the gray on the left. This is, the JSON LD that sits on the page. There's also different ways of doing it, microdata, RDFA. Google prefers JSON LD. It is the code that actually is in the language of the search engines. And that language is referred to as schema.org. Now, it really is a vocabulary. So, schema.org and Schema Markup is around the semantics of things. And so it really needs a common vocabulary that can be used to describe things. So when I describe this to, my mom or my dad, I'm like, we translate web content into the language of search engines. And again, so that language is called schema.org. And you can pretty much describe anything using this language. So there's over 800 different definitions. They all have properties to allow you to explain them with a lot of clarity. And so doing Schema Markup is really doing that translation. So really taking that content on your website and really translating it into this vocabulary called schema.org. And this has been around for a while. Like 2011 is when a collaborative group got together. Google, Yahoo, Bing, and Yandex, now Microsoft, came together to define this. And they're continuing to work together to define it. In fact, the 9th release came out in September. They're just about to release the 10th release. And it's the most releases we've ever seen in an entire year. Now, the whole reason why SEOs tend to get into this is because when you actually use Schema Markup, you have an opportunity to really stand out in search. So you can see on the left-hand side is a standard search result. And on the right-hand side is when you use Schema Markup. So you can see here that we're getting, an FAQ rich result. And there's actually 32 different ways to stand out. And so lots and lots of rich results. And so this is what you can use as sort of a really good visual measure that it's working and that Google's rewarding you. And also a great way to, I'll call it, like, really manage how your brand truly stands out and engages your users right at the beginning of their journey. Now, what's super exciting is that the rich results that Google is bringing out are also expanding. So even in just the last 60 days, we've seen some updates to what Google's offering as opportunities here. So on the far my left, so home fitness and well-being is a new home activities rich result that was released last month that allows you to actually, like in mobile, specifically in the US, have sort of videos and articles kind of show up for home-based activities. Very timing with regards to COVID and the fact that so many people are at home. The middle one is actually with regards to image licensing. So you can see there's actually like a licensable tag on here. This one's really interesting because it's actually going to pull in like how you can license that image and use it. And I find it really interesting, as we saw a couple of years ago, GDPR be so important about how people were reusing your data. And so licensing is actually, ad hoc kind of built in to schema.org. And then the last one example here is around the shipping options rich result that just came out for products just in time for Black Friday and sort of holiday shopping. And so yet another way for your products to stand out in addition to price, availability, and rating. So this area is changing and it's changing fast. And so if you haven't started on your journey into Schema Markup, today's gonna be a great day to kind of get you introduced to some key actionable concepts, and I'll try to simplify them for you. But it's growing, so the opportunities continue to expand. I also like to highlight that, people also say like, understanding's good. We talked about standing up, but like understanding is the other piece that Google uses it for to really match that searcher's intent. And Google was very clear in May 2019 that they're using Schema Markup to also help you be found across platforms. And I love this because I always see like this is like a machine language. So like, of course, voice search agents are going to use it, and perhaps like Internet of Things are also going to use it to understand and sort of provide service. And so just know that Google was articulate that like schema markup or structured data was being used to help you be found across platforms and being used to understand things across platforms. And then I'll guess the last piece before we get into some of our content is, there are actually tangible results from doing schema markup. So, when you delve into your technical SEO and you have your list of to-dos, just know that if any of these are the outcomes you're looking for, increased traffic, more clicks, more visibility for the brand, increased ease of use to engage people, or trying to get more people to engage with more content on your page, we have seen evidence from our customers at Schema App that schema markup can influence all of these different actual results. Now, I always say, like, don't believe me? Great. Like, go to Google. So we've put some listing here, some of the case studies from Google that also articulate the value. And again, I always think about like the value being across the entire customer journey. So whether it be Eventbrite talking about boosting traffic, Rakuten talking about like increasing time on page, increasing conversion rate from ZipRecruiter, there's some really great case studies. So if you're trying to, again, pitch that this is something important to do and you don't want to use the Schema App case studies, there's a link here for you to also go and read how Google's doing the case studies so you can use that to position the importance. Now, today's topic is about, simplifying things, because the fact is schema markup's complex. And I love this quote from John Mueller, one of the spokespeople from Google, mostly because it also like plays to the fact that schema apps trying to solve the complexity. But, he was really talking about like, I think in the future, at least in the near term future, there'll be more types of schema markup. And it's going to continue to get more complicated, and he's like, I don't see it getting any easier. So my job today is to actually try to simplify some of this. So as Google continues to make it complicated, I'm going to endeavor to simplify it. So let's jump in. I wanted to start with some definitions. There's a lot of weird definitions within schema markup. So entity, think of this as a thing. And Jeffrey, who's joining us today, has a philosophy degree, and it's like, what is this thing? That is, an entity is sort of what is this thing about? So when we talk about trying to identify, what something's about, that's the entity, the thing. And then we're going to talk about types and classes and properties. And I think this is sometimes best described by going to schema.org. So again, this is the vocabulary. And I'm using an event as an example. So the class or type, sort of describing what is this thing, is defined at the top of the page. And you can also search in the search box to find them. And then they usually give a definition below it. So an event is happening at certain times and locations, and it has these different properties. So the properties are how we're going to describe the event. And then for every property, they're going to put like an expected type. So that goes kind of back up here. So this is, again, sort of how things get connected. But I'm going to give you some more examples about like the classes, properties, and types as we go through this. You'll also see the same things on Google's documentation. So this is the documentation for those rich results, those like fancy results that I was illustrating. Again, the types are listed on the left, and then they talk about required properties, which is, again, what maps to schema.org. What you want to do here, though, when you start your journey doing this, is identify that property topic of the page and then start at schema.org to figure out the right type that you want to optimize it with. And I say this as like the first kind of key thing is that like, okay, well, there's rich results, there's schema.org types. Stop. Just like, what is this page talking about? Is it talking about an event? Is it talking about a medical specialty? Is it talking about a person? Go to schema.org first and have a look there. And that's going to get you started on what is it that you should optimize that page for. All right, let's talk a little bit about connected schema markup. I could rant all day about not putting the same schema markup on every page, but I won't do that because we don't have time. Although I was on a podcast with Bill Slosky and he was like, but on a medical and legal webpage, it makes sense. I agree. But the key here is don't put the same schema markup on every page. And we don't want to create islands of schema markup, being that like you don't want to just have like a product here and then you're going to your organization page on here. Ideally, you connect your schema markup so that it really tells a story about how things work together. So think of my introductory slide. This could be for a more elaborate organization. I have my organization, which is my US office. It's the manufacturer of this beautiful product, and the product has the offer, how to FAQ and image. So really your schema markup, when you define how it relates to other things, can be really powerful. Now I need to give you some tools on how to do this, or at least how to get started. So let's say you have a website that's about a restaurant and there's a beautifully well-produced video on that page. And so you're like, that's great, Martha. I think it's just a restaurant page. We're going to connect the two. So this is the footer of the Schema app page. So if you go to schemaapp.com and go to the footer, we have this free tool called Schema Pass. You can also Google it. And when you come here, it's going to say, how do you relate these two things? So I have these two topics, these two things on the page. I have it about a restaurant and I have about a video object. So you can select these two things. Again, we're talking about classes here. And then we're going to tell you how you can connect them. So it says the possible path is the restaurant is the subject of the video, or the video object is about the restaurant. Now, if the page is primarily about the restaurant, we're going to use subject of and link it to that video. Again, connecting that markup. Now, just to prove that you can pretty much connect anything with Schema Markup, we're going to connect a volcano with a gas station. And I love this. Like, it just shows how extensive and beautiful the schema.org vocabulary is. So volcano actually exists in schema.org. So volcano contains place, gas station, might be a little explosive. Or the reversal is the gas station serves an area of a volcano. Likely more if I'm talking about, let's say the gas station that's near Pompeii. The next piece when you're trying to connect your schema markup and do it properly is to use strong connectors. And so these are some of the properties that I really like. So remember, properties are under a class. And what's great about these 4 properties is they're pretty much like on every class. So, if we were talking about a blog posting about Jeff's favorite hockey team, who's hoping to win a Stanley Cup one day in this century, you could use the about and then use a Wikidata link for Joe Thornton that sort of just says, this is about Joe Thornton, about the Toronto Maple Leafs. Or if you're me and you have a software application, you might want to say, oh, the software application is the subject of this video. And so again, you're like not just saying, it's not really, the page isn't just about the video, even though that's what I could get a rich result for, but it's really about a software application that has the video. And I'm going to talk a little later about like how you can nest for rich results. All right, let's talk about errors, warnings, and content strategy. So the schema markup process, we see as a 5-step process. Strategy is figuring out like what you want to optimize and why. Authoring is creating the schema markup. Deploying it is getting it on the website. Maintenance is making sure you're keeping it up to date with whether Google changes or content changes. And reporting and analytics is sort of how you're showing that value or measuring that ROI. This process is iterative. And this is really like what we do at Schema App all day, every day. But it also, as you go through this, as you go through strategy and authoring, you might find that you're getting errors and warnings from Google, but that's actually like a good opportunity then to look at content, because you can get errors and warnings even though your schema markup is absolutely perfect, because the errors and warnings are only for the Google features. So we actually think they're like too strongly worded, like an error should be a warning and a warning should be a suggestion since it's like a recommended property. But it also can give you guidance on like where you might want to update your content to meet that criteria. And so here, for example, like is a rich result test tool. We're going to get into there a little bit later. But here it's giving me 4 warnings because I'm not including a SKU or a global identifier. This might be like, why aren't I including a SKU if I'm sort of trying to market my hockey stick? We're Canadian. I guess we got lots of fun Canadian jokes in here. So this might kind of be like, ask the question of like, why isn't this content on the page if I'm talking about a product? Whereas on this one where, it's an expected warning, it's a business decision not to include that content. So this is a job posting where I'm not including base salary. At our company, we don't include base salary in our job postings, and it's a business decision. And so this warning, like to me, is something we don't need to take action on because it's something we're choosing as a business not to include. And so those are some examples of when, errors and warnings don't necessarily mean that there's something wrong. And so instead, what I want you to take away is when you look at the Google required and recommended, and also the schema.org properties, consider those like suggestions on what should be in your content for that page. All right, everybody still with me? We're on number 5. We got 11 minutes to go. Testing tool. So I just gave you a bit of an intro into the rich result testing tool. Now, I love the structured data testing tool. It's been around forever, since we've been doing this since about 2014. We hear it's going to be retired, and it's not been kept up to date. And so what we love about it is that it's really helpful to actually see all the structured data on the page and sort of see how things are nested. However, the rich result testing tool is better for errors and warnings. So the structured data testing tool, you put in your URL, you actually then see, I'll say like all the entities on the page. Oh, I'm going back to those definitions. So here's an H card. So this is like 1990s schema markup. You can ignore that. Breadcrumb list, which is, a type of entity I'm describing the layout, and then also blog posting. And then it gives you some errors and warnings. Again, these haven't really been kept up to date. But what I love about this is it really shows you very quickly like all the content on the page. You can click on it and you can come over here on the side. So it's really easy to see it. However, everyone's been moving to the rich result testing tool. What's great about the rich result test tool is that it supports all rich results. It's kept up to date. It is a little slow, and it sometimes is hard to kind of see all the entities on the page. Again, we're sort of looking for nested advanced schema markup when we do our day-to-day kind of work with our customers. And so you can see here, though, what's great is it will show you exactly what you're eligible for. It'll also like pull out different types. So if you're doing multiple types of schema markup on a page, nested or not, it'll show you all those different pieces. And Jeff, I know you're a super user of both these tools, so it's something that we can talk about, or if people have questions. Our team did do some great analysis of the different type of tools out there as we say goodbye to the structured data testing tool. Rich result test is primarily what we use for sort of looking at rich results. And then our analyzer will also look at it across the site. But there's other great ones, free options, Chrome extensions and all. So some really good alternatives out there. Okay, let's talk a little bit. We've talked about the process. We've talked about the vocabulary. We've now talked about testing tools. So let's get into a little bit of the meat of schema markup. So I want to start with services because services is a really interesting one where our recommendation has changed recently. So I want to introduce this concept of a multi-type entity. So this is when something is best described by merging two types from schema.org. And so some great examples here are, a house for sale. Well, a house is a product because it has an offering and a price, but it's also a single family residence. Or a hotel room is both a product with an aggregate offer and a hotel room. A haircut is a service and a product. A book for sale is a product and a book. Comedy event is also a broadcast event. So often you'll multi-type entity, again, to best describe it and be the most specific as possible. And it also often increases your chance of getting a rich result. And so use it when you want to describe an entity. You don't really want to do more than two types. People have asked us that. But it also merges the two properties. And so recently when we were reviewing the description in schema.org for product, we noticed that it said product or service. And we're like, that's pretty savvy, schema.org, for updating that because it also has a service type or class. And so we're like, we've been recommending everyone to use service because that's the more specific type. It's got some great fields like provider that we really love, but it doesn't get a rich result. And so people in the past have been doing services as products, or omitting service or just doing service and not getting the rich result. I have a new recommendation. Do a multi-type entity. It is both a service and a product. You want the provider and some of the service-specific properties, but also the product. And so for those of you that support or do work for like legal lawyers or doctors or others that provide service, this is really a great use of, again, multi-type entity and some advanced piece. So again, figure out the primary topic of the page and then pick the most specific type or types to describe it. All right, nesting for rich results. So this is a bit more of an advanced approach. So Google has all these different rich results. Remember I was talking about like the 32 different ways to really stand out in search. And so you can see it's like article, book, breadcrumb. These are the ones that are changing often. And so what you might find though is, let's say hospitals, we do quite a lot of work with hospitals, and you're like, great, like I'm a hospital, I really want to stand out, but there's no hospital. It's, actually medical clinic kind of falls under a local business. But it's like, well, is there another rich result that perhaps makes sense? And, with COVID going on, like FAQ is a really great one for the medical field because, everyone has all these questions about the safety procedures. And so what you can do is actually mix those together. I'll give you another example. So the Schema App Highlighter is one of our products that we have where we can do schema markup at scale without IT, but I don't put a price on here. I don't have a rating specifically for the highlighter. Of course, it's available. So I don't really fit into the product, rich result out of the box. And so what I've done is I've put FAQ on the page. And so what I want to do is, again, let's go back to Schema Pass and like, how do I relate a product with FAQ page so that my highlighter page can get an FAQ rich result. So I go back to the bottom of the schema ad page, right? Go to schema paths and I match these two up, and boom, bada bing, it tells me that for a product or a software application, I can use subject of and nest the FAQ page. And so now this page that like I wouldn't have been able to get the product rich result is now eligible for the FAQ rich result. And so this is a really powerful way that, again, if you use connected schema markup to tell the story, to stand out in search, you can pretty much get any one of your pages or content to stand out. Okay, we're on the topic of advanced properties. So let's talk a little bit about additional type. So additional type is where perhaps the type in schema.org isn't as specific as you'd like it to be. And so you can basically, like a multi-type, kind of use additional type to further clarify the type. And so the example I tend to use is a dentist. A dentist is great, but it's more specific if I actually use additional type and call out orthodontics because my dentist is an orthodontic. Or you're describing an animal. There's actually like nothing in schema.org that allows you to describe an animal. Again, this is a beautiful moose, which in Wikidata tells me it's also the same as an elk. But here the type is a thing, and then the additional type is actually describing what it is. And so if you do anything with animals, this is a great way for you to describe that thing. Again, sort of, I would really press you that there's often something in schema.org you can use, but in these cases where you need to be more specific, this is a great approach that you can use. All right, we're coming down to 9 and then 10, and then we're jumping into Q&A. Everyone still with me? First 26 minutes of 5 hours. Move, make sure that blood's flowing. All right, brand marketing. This is something new that I pulled in for today. So there are often compelling events where considering schema markup to help messaging or marketing is really, really helpful. And we've done this for a ton of our customers. And so I thought I'd share it as just a way to kind of think about schema markup, not just as that technical SEO to kind of drive an impression in search, but perhaps also to inform search engines about changes. So acquisitions and mergers, rebrand, repositioning, and expansion are really, really great ways. We've had some of our customers change names, acquire companies, be acquired. So it's a really, really great way to do this. And so when you're doing a name change or an acquisition, I thought I'd give you an example here. You can use properties like same as. So like this organization is the same as this other organization, right? Like they're different names now, but they're the same. Part of, so if you get acquired, you might want to say like this is part of it, or use parent and sort of child relationships to define the relationships between the organizations. And then one of our favorites, alternate name. We were doing a rebrand and we used alternative name before the rebrand using like the old organization. And then we flipped it once it went live to make sure that Google was really clear about how those names were changed. And then you can also use Wikipedia and links in order to kind of define relevant brand associations. So again, schema markup is a tool that you can use and be very explicit and clear to make sure that those changes are being understood. All right, number 10. Before we go into rapid fire questions, measuring value from schema markup. Now, I see this as being so important because anything that we do in SEO, one, I'm usually asking for budget if you're buying schema app. I want to make sure that there's results from it. And so, whether you're trying to measure, what I love also about measurement of schema markup is you can actually look at whatever your goals are in digital and then like see how schema markup impacts it. So with our customers, we often ask them around like the desired outcome that they have, but specifically we want to know like what is important to them to measure. Is it more doctor bookings? Is it, more leads to the business? Is it sales of e-commerce? Whatever it is, more people reading the content for brand awareness. But these are some of the key ones that we've seen: increased traffic, clicks, increased ease, so where people are viewing multiple pages, as well as visibility. And so I want to just highlight like the two reports we spend a lot of time in Google Search Console. I love Search Console because it's accessible to everybody. So one is around performance reports, where you can actually measure the actual results from the rich result, and enhancement reports where you can see the valid instances. And so if you go into Google Search Console, for example, and you go under search appearance, you can actually look at the different type of rich results that are there and sort of clicks and impressions directly related to those rich results. And I love that this is specific. So you can say, I did the schema markup And these are the rich results, or these are the clicks and impressions that come directly from it. And of course, you can do sort of comparisons. Whereas the enhancement report is more looking at like the number of valid instances. So if, for example, you run an e-commerce store, like, and you put this across all your products, we want that valid instances to be able to articulate, what it is. And it also can guide you on errors or things that you need to fix. Now, we do schema markup all day, every day. And so we've actually started digging deeper into it to say, can we actually get deeper into the performance of the analytics? And so we've been coming up with a new schema performance analytics to look at, if you have markup on it, what's the likelihood that you're going to get clicks or impressions from it? And then we also like to use the schema markup to enhance analytics so that you can actually start seeing the contents of the contents. Hey, Jeff, guess who gets more sessions than you on our blog? Me. Challenge accepted. So we can add schema markup properties directly into the analytics so that you're actually like tagging things with custom dimensions. This area is called enhanced analytics. And there's other solutions out there, but it's, again, something that we're super passionate about. So Schema app, I'm just going to wrap up with a little bit about what we do, and then we'll jump into Q&A. So we're a full service enterprise schema markup solution. We have technology, we have high touch support, and we really work with any type of website and any type of content. And our whole goal is to help you achieve the results that you're looking for. And we really follow that schema markup process, right? We start with strategy. We automate the authoring and deployment. Our customer success team that, Jeff is a part of, really helps you understand it. And really the whole goal is to deliver ROI. And we're trusted by all types of businesses, small and large, around the world. And we'd love the opportunity to talk to you if you're interested. But enough about me. Let's jump into your questions.
That was amazing, Martha. Thank you so much. I think your tip about acquisitions and name changes actually blew my mind a little bit. I think there's a couple of people in the comments that were like, oh my God, we could totally do that. And it's a really good example of SEOs going outside of what is our typical remit as well.
Yeah, I have a super big passion around like, how do we make SEOs more strategic within the organization? So like my background's in business strategy and product management and sort of influencing cross-functionally. And so at Schema App, like we're constantly thinking about that. Like, how do we make the SEOs look like rock stars so that, like you're helping, again, if it's an acquisition, if it's a transition, hey, we have tools in our toolkit to help make this as painless as possible. And so we've done that for quite a few clients. So happy to sort of reach out and talk more about that.
Amazing. Right, I'm going to scroll all the way to the top of my questions list because we've had so many questions. Keep them coming as well because the lovely Kate is working behind the scenes to fill up my feed. So we're going to start with Alessa Korobka. Apologies if I've murdered that. Do you know why Google doesn't follow common standards most of the time? They change the standards that they use, but don't change the common standard, making it difficult, for example, with aggregate rating, etc.
Jeff, you want to take a hit at it? And then I'll...
Well, with the aggregate rating specifically, I think they were just trying to correct how it was being implemented. Aggregate rating was being used to get stars on like every page, everywhere, and it was sort of losing its impact or its meaning. And I think they were trying to protect that. As for the more broader question of why don't they follow common standards but then change standards wherever they want, I mean, Google's huge; they kind of do whatever they want. So
yeah, I think. Go ahead, Arnout.
I think there's one more thing in there, which is a common theme in the SEO world, is when we can game something, we start to game it. When we see shiny stars, we want shiny stars everywhere. Yeah. And I guess it's more us having inflicted that move of Google. Because if everybody would have used it in the way it was intended to be used and not gamed, then it would have probably stayed.
I think the other piece is schema.org we joked that it was like a bit like the Wild West, right? Like you can do anything with it. And, we're really comfortable with it because it's something we use every day. But I think sometimes also Google will put some restrictions on things to help adoption, right? To simplify it a little bit or just to be a bit more direct. So there's times where in schema.org, like we would want to nest a type, right? Because it makes sense to nest it to fully describe something. And Google is looking for text, right? And I think in those instances, instances, like they're really just trying to simplify it because it's their intent to get us to do that heavy lifting to help them understand better, to meet searchers' intent so they can also make more monies with ads, right? So you have to always like think of like what is their intent behind it. Again, part of it, I see it as both quality control, making sure people, aren't over abusing it, but also trying to make it a little easier, even though, it's still complicated.
Amazing. Great answers all around. I was definitely one of the people abusing star ratings. But that's fine. I think we all were. On to the next question. So we've had one from Fiber. How much time does it take for schema-rich content to show up in search after incorporating it in the code?
Oh, this is a big it depends answer.
Yeah. There's
no telling. We've seen it happen like as fast as the following week, all the way to like taking a month or so, like 30 to 90 days. Because there's other factors, right? That this comes up to like, what's the crawlability of your site, and can Google read the code like because of the speed of your page, for example, is something that we sometimes run into, or did you actually do it properly, so that it is parsable and so forth. So, but yeah, it depends is the answer. We we like to get our stuff like done within 30 days. So we're giving ourselves like as much time, as possible. Like if we can get it live in a week, then like maybe even in 30 days, we'll be able to start showing the results. Search Console is great for watching that uptick sort of as it crawls it and validates it.
Nice.
I wish there was a secret, but
yeah.
Reindex, right? Like
the quickest I ever saw was 24 hours, and that was just an FAQs drop down ages ago. But yeah, it so depends, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Fab. So the next one, a couple of people have asked about, particularly for CMSs like Shopify. What do you think about native schema markup and like schema markup apps in CMSs?
All right, this is one. Do you want to go first? Because then you're like the non-tool owner, and then I'll kind of chime in on my view.
Yeah, well, to speak from my own personal opinion, I would always like it to be fully integrated. So if I control a website or a CMS, I build it in from the core, because then anything I add to it or new pages, it's in straight away. However, sometimes, especially with bigger organizations, it's virtually impossible to implement anything. So in those cases, using a tool that uses JavaScript to inject it, or even using GTM could be a feasible solution. But for the short, well, depends. But so my personal opinion is that it's best to have it within the CMS, but that's not always possible. And then there's other tools that will get me communicating the right schemas and the right markup. So that's the way I look at it. So again, it's pretty much it depends.
Yeah, so I actually believe automate schema markup if you can, right? So if it's good, so that the whole question is as an SEO, you need to know what's good about schema markup, and also does it actually represent the unique content that you have? And so for example, WordPress, we have a free WordPress plugin that does really good job on articles and blog posting. Yoast has a different approach from us, but does good schema markup on there. Shopify as well. Shopify's increased and made their markup better over the years. You can also use the Schema app Shopify plugin. We're a little bit more advanced. But the key piece here is that, is it actually articulating what that topic of the page is, right? So to go back to what I just talked about. And so often it's just making it really generic, right? So there's another vendor out there that does local business for everything, but it's actually different types of local businesses. So, the whole reason Schema app exists is because we put you in control and allow you to use the entire vocabulary to do it. Or, if you can't use Schema app, if it doesn't make sense for us, use a generator that allows you to come up the most specific piece. Part of it though is what are you trying to explain to Google, and is it also good enough, right? So, like I said, Shopify schema markup today, that's built in-house, is actually pretty good, right? And so you don't need to go trying to do custom one, because you have other things to do. But if you're trying to do, I'll say like, nested FAQ on your product, or you're an enterprise product and you like have to use other suggestions on how to do that, or if you're working with an enterprise CMS, we're trying to get, resources for AEM, doesn't make sense. Like that's where looking at a solution that you can use JavaScript is a great opportunity. Again, I think like when we met with Guha at Google, like he joked with us, he's like, Schema App's like the scalpel. Like you guys can go in and like do whatever you need and like be very specific and use all the properties, use the appropriate tool. Sometimes you don't need that. But know what the kind of markup they're generating. And then one of the things I'll point out, a free resource that's out there is if you actually Google like microdata filter GitHub, we've actually produced free JavaScript to help remove microdata or basically filter out even bad JavaScript. So we actually built it originally to remove Yoast markup from our website. And then we used it to help other WordPress plugins like remove other default markup. And then we also use it in Shopify to remove default markup we don't like in Shopify. But it's a free JavaScript library that we created and we generated for the community. And so that's a resource out there. If you're trying to remove stuff without IT, that's a great resource to use.
Nice. So does Schema App integrate with most CMSs?
Everything.
Wow, that answers a lot of questions on here. A lot of people are like, what would you recommend? Well, I think there's only one we can recommend in this session.
No, it depends on your budget and depends on what you're trying to do, right? So I do like we have an awesome tool. We've been doing this since 2014, right? But like not everyone has the budget. Although, like a one site is $30 a month, which I argue like if you buy 3 coffees a week, like you may have spent $30 like on that. So, and we provide support. Like we're really passionate about teaching the community, which is why we're here today, not just me, but Jeff too. But it really depends on that strategy. That's why I always talk about like start with strategy. Like what are you trying to explain? What is the right schema markup to put on there? Can you automate it with something out of the box that's free? Amazing if you can. But if not, then what are the different solutions and how much time do you have to manually generate it in a generator? Or, can you create it in like a schema app editor, which is like less expensive? Or like, is your time more valuable and you need to do stuff at scale, which it makes sense to work with a more enterprise-like solution?
Yeah, I like that. And I think that leads quite nicely. I've got 2 questions I'm going to kind of smush together. So the first one is from Jason Bernard. Is Google able to cross-reference schema markup across different pages on the same site, different sites? And I also quite like Michelle Eichner. Again, apologies, terrible with names. It feels like there's a lot of initial and ongoing work. What's the net benefit of increasing a site's traffic? How does this all translate into analytics metrics? How do you measure the value of this? Like if you're putting $30 a month away into this app, like, are you getting return on investment? I imagine that's a question you must get all the time.
Yeah, so we see like ridiculous results from some of our customers, and part of that is like the ROI is going to come from how well you're able to manage that whole process, right? So the reason we talk about the schema markup process is, as you're doing strategy and authoring and deployment, like let's say you're doing like a first pass. Let's say you're a software company like me, right? And you're like, well, that's great. I have like all my product pages, but I don't talk about pricing or ratings, and I have all my blogs, and I have these pieces. So I'm like, I'm not going to get rich results on my products right away. But I might get sort of AMP articles on my blogs. I have a couple of videos, so those might show up. So the number of rich results I'm going to get at the get-go, at the beginning, isn't super high, but I'm getting some return. But the piece I'm going to learn as going through that process is like, oh, darn, I need to think about the content on my page to help my product pages stand out better, right? And so now I'm going to actually go to my content team, or if you're a small company like me, just like walk over to their desk and be like, let's add FAQ to those product pages. And so now I'm going to go through that process again. So I've kind of measured that I'm getting some results, but not all the results I want. Let's go and look at strategy again. Let's talk to sort of the content producing team to look at how we maximize this and take advantage of it. They're going to add it in. If you're using Schema App, you just set it up once again and it like rolls out to everything. And now I'm able to go back on a search call and be like, oh my goodness, like we spent this amount of time updating the content. I have tangible results now that I'm getting this many more leads, like the output out of it, or this many more impressions and clicks. And therefore, maybe it makes sense to continue to do this iterative process across the board. Now, we work with companies like SAP, right? Where our case study like 400% growth from rich results, right? Like ridiculous amounts of traffic that are coming in. But we've even seen like mature, more e-commerce companies, as they go through this, look at both the cost of doing it. So Keen Footwear is an international brand that we work with, where it's not only like, one, we reduce the amount of time IT and SEOs are spending on it. So huge cost savings from just a productivity standpoint. And then the case study we have for them, like 20% increase year over year in revenue, like in sales, right? So like that's, is it worth $30 a month? Or like, frankly, our enterprise stuff is more expensive than that. Yeah, absolutely. And if you're then thinking of this as a strategy, the best customers we work with are then planning with us on new content. Like, well, how are we going to make sure that stands out and is fully understood, aligned to our business goals? So the ROI is clear if you're actually wanting to work it, right? So this isn't just like a one-time done, great, I'm good, I'm just like going to go measure it and I'm never going to change it again. No, like I said, it's accelerating. We saw 3 new rich results in the last 60 days. We're seeing changes to like how they're rewarding FAQ. The market and how buyers and consumers are looking for information is totally different now that people are at home. So this is like, again, another tool in your SEO toolkit or marketing toolkit as you think about how you want to change it. Now, Jeff, you do this measurement every day, all day, like with your customers. Anything you want to add?
Yep. Well, it kind of depends on what it is you're hoping to achieve with the markup. So if you're a really sort of straightforward use case e-commerce store and you're going to use common CMS and you just care about stars on your product pages, then you can do that. But if it's more complex and you're looking to rank for a really like highly contested keyword, or you want to be a resource in a competitive space, or then it depends on how much you can do for each rich result across your site and have this collaborative effort where everything is targeted. And it really leads to conversations, like you said earlier in your presentation, around like opportunities for content. So you can look, like you said, with your product pages and say, hey, why don't we have an FAQ here? Or look at the recommended properties and think, oh, there's additional information we can have. And one of the questions, like Jason Bernard said, was that can we cross-reference schema across the site or a different site? And the answer is yeah, you totally can. That's a function of the schema.org vocabulary, is to reference external vocabularies. So if you have a content in your blog that's talking about a topic that's really core to your solution, then you can have that topic referenced to your solution pages as well. And then that way you can get lift across your site.
I guess there's also another point that I've seen is by marking stuff up, you also provide more context on when you're relevant. So I've actually seen drops in terms of visits, but my conversion rate's going up significantly because I was way more relevant than for that person. And I think not a lot of people think of it this way, but I actually don't want to turn up or rank my site if I can't provide the service, but I want to rank highest if I can. And this is a whole different an approach that SEOs need to not purely focus on, I need more traffic, or I need higher rankings, or let's say, but it's more about the intent. And I think where structured data can really help is be there when the intent is there with the user. And so basically making Google understand when you're relevant. So for instance, if you do re-commerce, so you buy all stuff on your website, so you buy all stuff, by default, pretty much all the website and all the vocabulary is set to e-commerce. So you can see this with everything. So now you have to turn it around. And unless you do that, it's very hard to rank a site on this. So you need to emphasize that. And with that, you can use, as you were saying, Jeff, you can use same as field and all these kind of things.
Business intent. I love that.
Yeah.
Arnout. Like when we talked about like, why are you doing schema markup? Like you need to look at like, what are you trying to do for the business? Like, it's not just for SEO. Like, do you need to, like be relevant in early marketing materials and topics that you want to show up and have your brand associate? Are you trying to convert? Are you trying, like, it depends on what it is, because again, the different tools in the toolkit are going to serve different purposes depending on how you're trying to engage with that customer at that time. And I loved your example of the metrics around, like, sometimes you see less traffic but higher conversion, right? Which, again, if that's the business intent, then it's actually a win, which is like FAQ, everyone's always talked about, like, 0-click searches, right? But if you're trying to just get brand awareness and serve your consumers, like, I love hospitals. I just spoke at another hospital piece, so I got lots of medical stuff on my brain. But, like, hospitals are trying to get that information about why it's safe, or how to book appointments, like, or like video appointments, like right up to the consumer at the beginning of that journey. So, FAQ makes sense there, right? Because they're trying to meet them at that area of need. And so, again, like, think of the different tools in the different ways depending on what that business intent is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. But on the other hand, like, say if you're a site like TripAdvisor and you're going to mark up everything, so it basically becomes easy chunks to show at every question. And if your business model is geared towards answering people and getting engagement on your platform, then you need to figure out whether you want to do that.
Totally.
And so you really need to understand the implications for everything. And the same goes if we mark up every product. Price comparison for any crawler becomes extremely easy.
Yeah,
because they can crawl, they have all the data. So I think there's always different things. So if you are the brand that produces trainers or whatever, yeah, and you have a shop, definitely mark it up. But if you are competing on it, it's not just for Google and all the other search engines. Any search engine can use Schema to easily compare different elements.
I love where you're going with this. So this is where I was talking about, like, that license information that have on images. Like, it's super interesting that Google has a rich result for that for images, because what you're talking about is, like, who can use my information that's now in a machine consumable way, which, is a whole other talk page that we should talk about, like, where do we think this is going? But I think it is super interesting and disruptive, and you have to think about it because people are crawling it, right? And understanding it.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you guys see on other search engines outside of Google as well?
We're just doing some deep analysis into Yandex right now to, like, kind of get back up to speed on sort of what they're doing. Bing's been a bit of I'll say a laggard in documenting and telling what they're doing, but they are using it. And as far back as, oh man, what year did I talk to him? Like 2.5, 3 years ago, I spoke to the team member at Microsoft who actually started schema.org, and they were looking at structured data for virtual reality sort of innovation projects. So they are using it a lot. Whether they're articulating all of it and their documentation is another story.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
They're not really documenting it very well. I know for a couple of our customers that have helped implement with, they were really concerned with Bing as well as Google, of course. And we needed to, like, find proof of rich results or impact while dynamically injecting it with JavaScript, and we were able to. So it's technically possible, and Bing is consuming it and using it, but their documentation's not very thorough at all.
Fair enough. Start with Google and the rest will follow, right?
Yeah,
well, can I just build on this though? Because, like, I wouldn't say, like, so Google still has, like, the majority of the search share, right? So from, like, a kind of size of the pie, 80%ing. I think what's interesting though about Bing, and I was reading one of Don Anderson's articles around BERT and sort of, the fact that, everyone's been like, oh, Google's using BERT and so forth. Well, like, Microsoft's been doing this for a long time. Like, and in fact, like, some of this is built on tech that they've built. So, in my conversations in 2017, right? Like, I want to just, like, note the date, like, they were doing some pretty advanced stuff, kind of thinking forward, how we actually see that kind of get disrupted and change, like, from a pure, like, consumer behavior and sort of people have to be using Bing, right, to, like, have that. But I think, I'm hearing interesting things and connecting to us that show that they're really deep in the machine learning and understanding that it shouldn't be, like, fully ignored.
Nice. Appreciating we've only got about 7 minutes left of your guys' time, so I want to crack on with some more questions.
Let's do it.
I think this is a really important one. So Keith Towns has said, is there a danger that if I get this wrong, my search ranking could go down?
Yes, there is, if you get it completely wrong.
You should work with an expert to make sure you don't get it wrong.
Right.
No, but there is so if you start gaming it and putting the wrong stuff on, you can get the manual penalties on structured markup. So that's a way to get it wrong. And say you mark it up in a way that Google, you basically think this is the good way to do it, but actually you've marked up something completely different. You might be starting to show up for the wrong kind of intent or the wrong kind of searches. Say you do house rentals and you've marked it up as a house for sale, for instance. Then what can happen is that you start seeing less relevant clicks or more clicks but less relevancy. Those kind of things can happen. Well, I think the biggest thing that I've seen was just people spamming it and then Google saying, you lose.
One thing we got really common with people jumping into Schema Markup for the first time using our tools are going too far and taking all of the available properties as a challenge and trying to fill out everything they can think of because they're really excited about this new part of SEO that they're trying on. And then they drop for some of the keywords or searches that they're relevant for before because they weren't doing it in a targeted or in a smart way. So I think there is a risk for jumping in and like over marking up and not being specific on what you're hoping to achieve.
Yeah, I think there's also to like get familiar with the guidelines. Like I didn't kind of cover all the others. Like Schema Markup has to represent content on the page. So when I talked about that process of like revisiting content, like you can't just, fill it all out and be like, oh, that's great. My Schema Markup says this, but my content says this. They really have to, represent for the machines what is on the page. And so Google does have like some pretty good guidelines, and even by rich result, I would say like there's this like thumbs up, thumbs down section before you get into the required and recommended. So if you're like, oh my gosh, it's too much information, just like for the thumbs up and thumbs down, they give some really like specific things. And some of them is like events can't be like a sale, like 50% off for 2 weeks, right? Like so they kind of give you some strong guidelines. And then look for, there's a lot of resources. Like we've put a ton of resources on YouTube, for example, or under our resources tab on our website. There's a lot of how-to and best practices around common types of Schema Markup. So, there's tons and tons of resources out there to learn. Test it, right? Like this is just like a lot of the other things that you're doing in SEO, try it page by page, do some experimentation. And then as you get sort of your habit of doing it, then you can do better. And, again, I'll plug us a little bit, but like we provide email support to all of our customers where we'll answer like any question, whether it be about Schema Markup or the tool. And I think that's something that we do really unique. It's something we've always done because it's confusing and we want to make sure that you're really sort of, taking those first steps and feeling like someone's got your back.
Nice one. I think this next question will be a nice thinker. So Deanna Richardson says, any thoughts and predictions around Google's passage indexing and understanding content in chunks and how Schema could help us structure our content?
I have an opinion on this, but
well, no, start.
Okay.
Start.
So one, I'm going to plug Don Anderson's like review of BERT. It's a very long, extensive passage. If you're a summarizer like me, read the first 4 paragraphs and the last 10 paragraphs and you'll be good. But like she talks a lot about the evolution of BERT and understanding. And, what I think is so interesting around sort of the evolution of passages and kind of understanding intent and topics and context is that they're really trying to understand like what part of the page really makes sense. And kind of big picture, like if you do a search right today on how do I know my Schema Markup's working, for example, like Google is going to show you a featured snippet. And then if you click on it, it's going to highlight a passage within the page that they believe answers the question, right? So one thing is like, I think Google's been testing and evolving this a lot sort of from the beginning. Where Schema Markup helps you explain is like really on the content of the entire page, right? right? So how do you build context of the different topics? Now, what we've talked about is like how the properties in schema.org help you identify the things that the search engines identified are interesting around that topic. And then Google identifies the properties and things that they're interested in and get to the rich result. Now, those things together give you like a pretty decent mapping of the type of context and topics they want around certain topics to understand it. And also then there's the whole human aspect of it. So how I connect these things together is like, you know, you kind of still want to write for the human and the intent. The schema markup can help you identify like what are some of those things the search engines have already defined with things that they want to know and matching that intent. But the structured data is going to help you give context of the whole thing. And then the passages is going to be like, is your actual content answering some of those questions?
I think another part in here is what happened earlier was with Hummingbird, where you could ask one question and then a follow-up question, making it explicit that it's about the same item. It could be the Eiffel Tower and something else. And if you specifically say that, with that, it doesn't need to be in the text, but if you describe it in your schema, then you know that it can be used to answer as a follow-up question. So it's all about the context that you add. So the way I often explain schema is also, it's a way that you can talk or you can validate what's on the page, because a computer is getting way better at understanding text, but by far not as good as they want us to be. Like, we can read a text and understand the concept and everything around it because it's already embedded somewhere in our brain, whereas this is missing. And with schema, you can add that layer of context in that page, so it fits in. So the thing you read is also verified that it's actually about that.
Think of this as coming back to my intro slide, where you can connect the dots, right?
Exactly.
With the schema to answer questions and intention. And with that, I'll hand it back to you.
Things are nested really important. Yeah.
Nice. Oh, great to come full circle, guys. I think we've covered a lot today. Thank you so much for your time. I think we're going to have some people join us in a matter of seconds, which will be very exciting. Ready for our next session. I just want to say thank you to everyone who's tuned in, because we've had some amazing questions. If they didn't get answered, please do chase all of us on Twitter to get those answers, because we've not got anything better to do. Just come and ask us stuff. Yeah, thank you so much.